I don't have any time for that shit. I don't
Right.
care. I don't care. If you want to, if you have something, you know, negative, but that might be helpful, then I'm ready to hear it. But if it's just negativity for negativity's sake, then I'm just not interested, and I have other things to do with my time.
Yeah.
So you were asking about how the guys are this year compared to last year?
Yeah, because I mean, you've luckily enough had sort of last year and now this year you've built on a lot of the stuff that you did last year. So I'm just curious as to if you've noticed a difference with them and that kind of thing.
I've noticed a difference in them, especially from the buy-in side on the physical prep.
Okay.
Last year, I was lucky to already know a lot of the staff and some of the players, and they were, you know, pretty open to what I was bringing in, and it was new stuff, so it was pretty exciting for them, and it was a bit different from the beatdown they usually got as a preseason. But this year, I feel like having done all this work, that's kind of the groundwork last year with the sprinting and the tempo format. They understood why we did it, and they were already bought into that process. On top of the fact that I made a little presentation for them to explain the preseason, how it was going to go, the different phases, the different settings, and then gave them some time over a Zoom call like that to just ask some questions. By the time we got to the first day, there was no questions and there was no ifs or buts. And I would also send out the plan for each session, the detailed plan, like my session plan, before each session. So they knew, you know, 7 p.m. we're on the track with our runners, and we spend 15 minutes there, and then we go to the hill, and then we do hill sprints for 15 minutes, and then we go to the field, and then we put our cleats on, and then we start, you know. So it was very detailed in that regard, which I thought might be a little too much. But in the end, what I realized is that I think that this additional structure and just structure and planning actually allowed them to then have a bit more fun in the process, because they already knew what was going to happen. So within that, they just had to execute, and then they could spend a bit of time, you know, laughing around and spending some time together. And so we had, since the 21st of July, which was the first kind of official restart for us, we've never had under 30 guys, and we've had up to 40 guys. We've had 40 about two or three times, which is, in my mind, I mean, in my experience, unprecedented for preseason, where we do almost only physical prep. So it's been really good, and the guys so far, they said that they're feeling good, and obviously need to get up to speed with playing again, because it's been a long time since we had a real game. So there's, you know, just some bearings to be found again on the pitch and whatnot. But I think physically they're in a really good spot, probably the best they've been since I started with them last year. So that's kind of what I would say about that.
That's decent. I mean, I was curious that, like, how did you, I don't know if it's maybe a little bit easier over there between you and the coaches, get that much time in terms of physical prep with the guys? Because I know the big thing that I've always struggled with is the amount of time that you have access to the guys. And it's just,
How long do you usually have access to them for?
I'm trying to think. I mean, look, I've only had this year really, the beginning of this year, before things went sort of haywire. And I think I had about half an hour to 45 minutes initially at the beginning. And then the closer we got to the preseason games and that, I was sort of relegated. I think I got about 15 minutes with the guys. So basically I was looking at just getting some sprint work in, and that was it, kind of thing. So it makes it quite tough to sort of build, like, because I quite like the way you sort of structured things and how you built it up.
I was lucky that I knew the staff already coming in, and with the work that I did last year, they saw that it would, you know, it was paying off, and the guys appreciated the physical work too, and it allowed us then to just, I think, express ourselves better on the field when it comes to the game of rugby. For me, it's that at the end of the day, if you look at the impact of physical prep on the game, is it important? Yes. Is it the determining factor to win? No, absolutely not. Sure. Like, I'm absolutely not, you know, delusional to the point of saying, you know, I'm making sure the guys are going to win every game. No. This is not my job. My job is to get them to the point where they can actually fully express their technical, tactical skills. And I think that's the best we can do as physical prep coaches. I mean, at my level anyway. So the time that I had last year, I asked for a lot, and which I got in the preseason, and I was still able to get in season twice a week, 30 minutes. So I would do warm up plus sprinting or warm up plus change of direction in each session, which we then cut down to in the second part, or before I even started, but we were going to cut it down to just once a week, 30 minutes in season, warm up plus sprint. For the preseason though, I've always had quite a bit of time. So that at first I had an hour last year. So I would do warm up and sprint, or warm up and change direction, and then a half an hour of conditioning in the form of tempos usually. And this year they actually gave me more in the preseason. I don't know if the main reason I think was that the coaches wanted a really solid base to work from, and they didn't want to just, go too deep into the tactical stuff too early. So they actually gave me those 4 weeks of purely physical work at the beginning of the preseason. I had 90 minutes. So I used a little bit more time on the sprints, and then I added some combat prep at the end. Like you probably saw. I think it is a lot of time, for physical prep alone. And I think next year what I'm going to try and do is actually, I might keep to do that transition and to find the right balance. I might keep one tempo session a week, but then the other session, the conditioning portion, I would like to integrate it into some rugby small-sided games. I need to sit down with the coaches, because I also don't want it to go, it's so easy to try and do something and then just do nothing at the end. You try to do too much in the same time. So I want to find some small-sided games that makes sense from a rugby standpoint. I want to find a format that makes sense from a physical prep standpoint, in terms of stopwatch, in terms of work to rest ratios, how to progress volume over time, how to increase the complexity of the situations that we present to the guy without making it like if the ball falls down, then it ruins the whole, the whole interval, the whole.
Right.
So it's tricky to find those things, but I think, leading into something where maybe the talking pretty specific to position here, but the back three, so 11, 14, 15 might, kick high balls to each other and sprint to get the ball, and then kind of repeat that. And that might be their repeat sprint kind of effort towards the end of the physical prep, while maybe the front rowers, maybe the second rows as well, they might do like a 3-on-3 or a 3-on-6 pick and go, or a 6-on-3, like the 6s are the attacking group and the 3 are the defenders. And the goal is to get, again, I don't know, maybe, 3 pick and goes and then rest for a minute, and then 3 pick and goes and rest for a minute. Maybe turn those groups of 3 each time. Just to replicate really what they're going to find in the game, which is always going to be more intense than just wrestling. Which I integrated this year, the whole grappling, wrestling, one-on-one work, especially for the forwards. And the feedback I got was that it's really good. We feel that it's, going to transfer to the game, but the intensity is not high enough. It's just not the same, a one-on-one scrum, or, hand-to-hand wrestling kind of thing, or even just, big old like hug and trying to grab the other person up. It works really well to prepare the upper body, I think, but it's still not close enough and intense enough. And so I think that was missing this year. And I think we can kind of meet in the middle somewhere and potentially save some time on the prep, on the conditioning side, especially, and maybe focus more on some integrated games. But that's really something I want to sit down with the coaches, like the backs coaches and the forwards coaches individually, and then really kind of hash it out. What do you need? What do you think is a good thing? And try to come to a consensus so that we have something that makes sense. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, oh, we'll just do, because it's so easy to tire the guys out. We could do a touch where every time you touch, you have to run back to your try line and back. I mean, there's lots of things to get the guys tired, but that's not what I want. I want to get them ready. And so kind of finding the right in between is the challenging part.
It's difficult. No, I mean, I must admit, like what I quite enjoyed about, because I came in and this is the first time that I had access to like a whole squad. I mean, I eventually was taking sort of the firsts, the seconds, and there was a couple of the thirds that were sort of tagging along as well. So they were like upwards of sort of, I think 50 to 60 guys at a time, it was just chaos. But what I found, and look, I was quite lucky in the quality of player that I was working with. I mean, some of the guys had played sort of at Currie Cup level, which here in South Africa is sort of like that's high provincial standard, and some of the guys had even played Super Rugby before. Oh, wow. So I mean, you know, some of the guys are sort of really high caliber. So I think probably made my job a little bit easier, just because, you know, they're so good. But the one thing that a lot of them came back and said to me is that, particularly with the tempo work, because the year before the club, the guy had just given them Broncos, like each session was just Broncos, and like shattered. So they actually ended up, what they started doing is, you know, they'd say, okay, we're doing Broncos tonight, and most of the guys would rock up after the fitness session is done, because they knew they'd be completely like stuffed. So
yeah.
So a lot of the guys came back to me and they said they feel amazing. Like they hated it at the beginning because there's, you know, like with 75-second rolling clock, they're kind of standing there going, well, okay, what do we do now, kind of thing. But by the end of it, they were loving it. And by the time we got into the field, the guys came back and they said, geez, we're feeling good. And the coaches even started to come back. And I think that's where your point about sort of sitting down with the coaches is something that I would definitely do a lot more of, or a lot sort of more of an integrated sit down and go, okay, this is what I want. You know, what do you guys want? And how do we sort of merge that together? Because I think that becomes a big, because I mean, we had the coaches and I had a big sort of, you know, argument at the beginning of the pre-season, because they thought what I was doing was too little. It was like, you know, you got to do this and this, and you got to nail them in like 200s. And I was like, just, you know, just hang on, just give it a bit and let's see. Anyway, it turned out to be really good. But I mean, I like the way that you structured things going forward. What I did want to ask, had it on the tip of my tongue now just before I started talking. I think it was with the sprint work that you did. The volumes that you're working on with the sprint work, is that based off the chats that you've had with Derek Hansen and that, or I mean, is that sort of how did you come to those volumes?
I pulled them mostly from James Smith's work around Rugby Union. He's got a couple really good presentations that he sells on his website. And it was kind of a blend between what Derek Hansen talks about, what I saw from Keir in the past, what I got from James Smith. So I kind of blended all that together in terms of finding the right volumes, and I think I got up to 250 meters a session in the hill sprints, and then about 150 meters at the top, at the most per session on flat, and then 50 and, or I think it was 40 and 80 respectively for forwards and backs on the flying sprints per session.
Okay, all right.
And so that's kind of what I went to as a top end volume for sprints. I started much lower. I think the first sprint session was 150 meters hills. So I did 5 times 10 and 5 times 20. So that's 150. And then built up over, I believe, 3 sessions, maybe 4 to 250. And then dropped the volume back down to about 100 meters, if not less, on the flat. And then built that back up to 150, and then moved to the flies, which were obviously a lot less. Last night we did kind of some sprint, float, sprint type efforts, and we did 4 sets. The backs did 10, 10, 10. So 10 meter sprint, 10 meter float, 10 meter sprint. So about 80 meters total, and the forwards did 7, 10, 7. So that's 15. That's about 60 meters of flying sprints for the forwards, with at least 3 minutes in between. I probably won't go anywhere much higher in terms of volume, because I really want to. I don't have a ton of time. I have 30 minutes for full warm up plus sprints, so I usually try to get to the end of the warm up, with obviously some sprints. And even the first rep last night out of the 4 wasn't a full intensity rep, because I wanted them to just be comfortable with the change of rhythm,
Right.
and the flow of the 3 sections. So really, we just did three times those efforts at full intensity. But I think it's still better to have that lower volume, but keep the intensity really high, than try to just do too much and you'll lose in quality. And on the sprints, my only goal in season is just to keep that stimulus for the guys, from an injury prevention standpoint before anything else, and then from a performance standpoint too, because the conditioning and the contact, that's taken care of by rugby, no problem. They're probably going to be fitter at the end of the season than they were at the end of the prep, by just playing the game a bunch. So I'm not doing any conditioning in season. I'm not doing any more, combat prep, because now they're full into contact, so I don't need to prep them anymore. So for me, the most important part remains the sprinting.
Yeah. I'm curious that, how do you get there? Because it's the one thing that I sort of struggled with the sprint is getting the buy-in from the guys to go like all out. Because I tell them each session, you've got to go all out, otherwise you sort of wasting your time here. And you get some guys that would, but then there's always those guys that sort of coast. I don't know, how did you get the buy-in from them to go push all out in the sprints?
I think holding them back at first helps. If you tell them to go all out right out of the gate, maybe some of them, like you said, are apprehensive, or they pulled a hammy in the past and they don't want to do it again. So gradually exposing them to those high intensity efforts. I think, the first hill session we did, I said nobody's 100% today. Like if you're in really good shape, if you run during the confinement, if you did the preseason that I sent to you guys, you can get up to 90%, but I want nobody full out today. And then guys that are not ready, like you're at 70, 80% on your sprint, and then the second session, it was like, okay, now you're, 90, 95, 85, maybe, if you weren't in shape. And so up to the third, fourth session, I gave the option to the guys not to go 100%, but always telling them, next session or the following session or in 2 weeks, we're going to go 100, but now we're just, we're getting back into it. So I framed it like that. There's always the guys that are not, you can see that they're not running 100%. You can't do it for them at the end of the day. Out of 40 guys, I know there's always going to be those 4, maybe 5 guys who, and some of them are older players too. They know themselves really well, and maybe, they're just managing themselves a little bit. I think that's fine. I always make sure to tell them, nobody's getting hurt today. If you feel something, if you feel a niggle, if you don't feel good, just don't push it. Don't blow a hamstring, don't pull a calf or anything. So I always try to emphasize that. If there's new guys too, I'm always telling them, you didn't do the last 5 weeks of prep, don't run full tilt because you're going to get hurt. So that's obviously always a concern. But at the same time, if the guys are good, I want them going 100. And that's something that I'll kind of reinforce during the rest intervals. Like last night, I was really happy with their first 2 runs, but I still felt like the second sprint portion wasn't as intense as it could have been. They weren't kind of, really stepping back into it and really revving up again to get to the finish. And so I emphasized that. I said, this first part was really good. Second part float was good too, but I really want you to turn it on that second one again, because again, that's gonna, it's gonna be something they have to do in a game. I tried to frame it in a game situation. I said, the first sprint is when you pass the line. You beat the first defender, you pass the line, and so when they did it with the ball, I told them, while you accelerate for your first fly 10, you have the ball in 2 hands. Once you get to the gate for the 10-meter sprint, you put the ball under one arm, sorry. And then in your float phase, you come back to 2 hands. So now you've passed the gain line, you've passed the first defender, and now you're into space and you're looking left, right. Do I have someone with me? What am I going to do next? And then on the second sprint, boom, you put the ball under your arm again, and then you just send it as if you were, stepping and trying to run around the last defender or something like that. So I think maybe framing it into more of a game situations, which we can do now because we're on the field and it's on flat and they can do fly sprints because they're ready. it's maybe a little bit easier to get them to those intensities by framing it in a game setting. But yeah, on the hills, again, the first 2 or 3 sessions, I asked them not to go 100%. I held them back, and I think that with the work we did last year and what I've explained as well about sprinting throughout the last year, they understand that it's a very important part of their physical preparation, that it is a determining factor of performance on the field, because no try is ever scored through a jog, you know. So it's I think maybe that might help to frame the sprints for the guys.
Okay, cool. And then I guess sort of changing tact a little bit. I did also want to chat to you sort of about, you know, your personal training, your business, and all of that you do. I'm just curious. So, like, I mean, I work as a basically my main job is I work in orthopedic and sports rehabilitation, and then the other side of it is the performance side. And I've started to sort of do a lot on my own now. So, I mean, I was working with a practice up until COVID hit, and now since COVID, sort of things have kind of, and so I guess I would like to know a little bit about your story and how you sort of got up and got going, and just interested how you sort of built up your brand kind of thing. I actually by the way, weird thing, but I quite like your logo. I don't know where you got it from, but like I quite like the ballerina with the barbell above her head. This is very cool.
Yeah.
So just sort of a little bit about how you got going, kind of thing.
Yeah, so quick backstory on the logo. I used to train for Olympic weightlifting in a gym that was attached to a parkour facility. And there was a collection of athletes training there. There was a hand balancer, Joe, his name is. So he would be doing one hand handstands as his warm up. Like, it was ridiculous. And a bunch of different guys, some weightlifting guys, some parkour guys, some stunts guys. And there was this one guy who came to train for parkour, and he did ballet on the side, or in addition to it.
Yeah.
And we all thought it was really cool and original. And, you know, the good old, do you even lift, bro? We came up with do you even ballet, bro? And then we thought, oh, we should make a t-shirt out of it. And so I put the logo together, or the ballerina and the barbell myself, thinking, oh, that'll be a cool t-shirt. And then later on, when I started my coaching company, I used it as the centerpiece for the logo. So that's kind of the backstory of the logo. But yeah, the personal training, I'm a big believer in that you have to show your worth by working for free at first. And so when I started out, after I passed my certification, I started coaching some friends and people that I knew against donation. Like I said, you know, I'll train you, and if you have a bit of money to spare, like I'll take it. But if you don't, then I'll just ask you for a good review after 2 or 3 months if you're happy with the work that we're doing. It started like that. Started working for another gym as well. I wasn't, on my own right from the beginning. It took me probably 3 to 4 years to be on my own full time.
Wow. Okay.
And that was not knowing what I know now about the power of social media and digital marketing and brand building, which I'm a lot more aware of now. And I do a lot of it now as a result of, having learned those things. So I think I could have greatly accelerated my growth by doing this from the get-go, by having a podcast, making videos, creating good content. I did at first, but I didn't know as much as I know now, and I don't think I did it correctly. But it took me 3 or 4 years to get on my feet by myself. Again, transitions between 2 or 3 different gyms, coaching PT there, here and there as well. Finally had enough, clients to run my own show, and I did that for a year and a half before moving back here to Switzerland. At which point I had to, some of the clients that I had in PT in Canada, I switched to online coaching, and then had to kind of restart things here. It took me a year to transition back into coaching full-time here. So for a year, I had a side job, or I had a job plus the coaching on the side, which was a lot, probably too much in hindsight, but I wanted to get back to coaching full-time as soon as I could. So it was a I guess, a sacrifice that was worth doing. And now I evolve on kind of three different planes, if you will. The physical prep with the rugby club that I'm involved with, the Nyon Rugby Club here locally, and then I'm starting to help more and more with the Swiss Academy as well. So the youngsters from U16 to U20, slowly moving up the ranks in there, and see if I can maybe one day touch the senior team as well and have an impact there. And then, so that's one. And then I've got my personal training clients that I have, whether it's at the gym or even in their homes here locally where I am. And then I have a bunch of online clients as well that that's something I've been doing for a while now. And I've refined the process of coaching and follow up and programming online. And I have a pretty comprehensive kind of spreadsheet set up for each client through Google Sheets, so I can fill it out, they can fill it out, and regular check-ins with my clients throughout the week. They have to send me videos depending on what they're doing. So those are kind of the three main aspects of what I do in terms of coaching.
Okay, geez, that's a lot. And there was actually something I was going to ask you about, is the social media side of things, because so I mean I've only I say cotton onto it now. I mean, I've known about it and using it as building a brand, but I mean, I'm terrible at it. Like I'm not the guy that likes to post my stuff up on social media and that, and put it up there for other people to sort of have a look at, even though I know that's one way of sort of getting yourself known in that. So, I mean, how did you go about building your brand effectively using social media? How did you start that whole process?
So I really started pushing it. I really started posting quite a bit last year when I started working with the Nyon team. And that got a little bit of traction already, but I think the determining factor was in December. I started the podcast in December 2019, started my podcast, and that was huge from a marketing standpoint, but more from a connection standpoint, like a networking standpoint in the industry. I think having the opportunity to talk to some guys, who work with pro teams and who are very successful at what they do is an opportunity I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I feel like those experiences have been really enriching for me. Even as a coach, I learn a lot from the people that I interview. I obviously try to put on a good show for people who are willing to listen and to watch, but it's almost a bit of a selfish endeavor in the sense that I gain a lot out of it as well. I think I've grown more as a coach in the last 6 months as a result of doing the podcast than I have in the previous 2 or 3 years. Just because I'm constantly exposed to new information. Now I'm getting people on that I don't know as much about as before, because I'm slowly running out of coaches to interview. The guys that I follow all the time, and look up to. I almost had all of them on already. And so now I'm starting to look a little farther and see what's out there. And again, things come up and when 2 or 3 guests in a row mention a certain book, you're like, oh shit, I got to read that now. And so that's helped a lot. Creating videos of what I do has helped a lot as well. And I think I really enjoy that process. So that might be the upper hand that I have on that. I really enjoy all the kind of the techie side of, editing. Well, techie, it's not very techie, but editing videos and putting content together and try to understand, what thumbnail are people going to click on and how to do those things. I was pretty deep into search engine optimization, into SEO for the other company that I run with my wife beforehand. So I had that knowledge previously.
Okay.
But I think for me, the biggest thing has just been to share. And I think Gary Vee says it best. It's like document, don't create. Don't dig too deep to just find inspiration of what to write. Just document what you do on a daily basis. And so that's what I try and do as best as I can. And not only does it just create content for me right then and there, because I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I just, talk about what I'm thinking about right now, or film what I'm doing and then comment on it. It's pretty straightforward. It also helps me reflect on what I do. I filmed the whole preseason, or I had clips of every session, and that allowed me to put together that kind of review that I did earlier this week or late last week. and kind of review everything that I did and judge whether that was good or not. And I'd never done that in the past. I'd never sat down and be like, okay, reflect on what you did and draw some conclusions, get some feedback from the players, from the coaches. How can we make it better next year? And so that process of documenting and sharing has really helped me as well in that. And another thing that it's helped me with a lot is just structuring the way that I think about things forces me to better understand it so that I can explain it. If I can't explain it, I don't really understand it, right? And so you might have ideas in your head and you're like, oh yeah, I know that. But then when you try to communicate it to someone, you're like, that doesn't work.
Yep.
So forcing myself to frame it in a way that's understandable kind of reassures me in the sense that I know what I'm talking about, or at least I think I know what I'm talking about. I wrote stuff 6 months ago that now I look back on, I'm like, I guess that I said that then, but I don't really agree with it now.
Yeah,
but that's fine. You got to be okay with changing and evolving. And so I think it's that process that I really enjoy. And again, and I've said that a couple times, putting things out helps me be, how to say that, the fact of putting things out on social media instantaneously puts the public eye, let's say, on what you do. And if you're doing shit, you're gonna get shit comments back, or you're gonna get the feedback that no, that doesn't make sense, or yeah, that's not good. And so it's almost like testing what I do. Is what does what I do make sense? If I put it out and it has a good response, then that probably makes sense. For most people, at least. If I put it out and there's crickets or there's negative comments, then I know that maybe it's not as good as I thought it was. So it forces me to just, I think, be better at what I do on an ongoing basis. And I mean, from the beginning, my goal was always to have the biggest impact possible in a positive way in what I do. And I'm not going to get there alone. So the more people that, can come on board, and I'm starting to see a bit of a community form around the podcast, and people tune in and listen in, and I get some messages here and there being like, hey, I really like what you do. Like, I've been listening for a while. It's encouraging, and it shows that there's still room out there for more, right? You could say, oh, but there's, the Simply Faster podcast, and there's, Training Think Tank does their podcast, and everybody's got a podcast now. And you might think, oh, well, what's the point of me doing a podcast? Or what's the point of me talking about, sprinting? Because there's Derek Hansen and Sam Portland and James Smith. They've all, they're all way more knowledgeable and qualified than me to talk about this. So why would I give my 2 cents on it? But I think it's always valuable because you come with your own background, your own experience, and just because you are not working with, and like you said, you work with already, high-level guys, high-level athletes, but I don't. Like, I'm not kidding myself in saying that, like, I'm an elite coach. I'm coaching an amateur team in Switzerland. Like, it's nothing like phenomenal, far from it. But I think there's also a lot of coaches in that situation, right? There's so many coaches that coach at amateur level that don't have the time to implement all the things that the pros talk about. They don't have the technology to all the logistics and the staff that's required to, talk about. There's all that cool stuff about force velocity profiling now, and biasing your speed work towards the force or the velocity aspect of it. And depending on your profile, you need more of this or more of that. Like, I don't even have a sled. Like, I can't even do resisted sprints. I have a hill. Okay. That's about the equivalent, but I can't load the hill. It's like, so I can't even do that, overspeed. I can't do overspeed. Yeah. Run downhill. But I mean, it's, and the hill that I have is not safe to do that on. So sometimes those things they're really interesting, and I love those things and I love to read about them, but are those the right things to put in my context? I don't think so. Not right now anyway. So how can I get the most out of the little time that I have? And I think that, relates, a lot of people can relate to that because it's a setting that is relatable to. It's not a pro setting. We don't have a huge budget. We don't have a budget for physical preparation. They're already compensating me a little bit for being there. So that's already a win. So I think, all those things make your story relatable no matter what level you coach at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I mean, I think that's why your sort of amateur like prep thing has been brilliant because of that exact thing that you just mentioned. I mean, I know for me, I've always been a bit of a perfectionist. So if I read something or see something, I'm going, okay, cool. This is how we've got to implement it exactly. And then you get to your situation, you go, well, actually that doesn't work, or that's not, it's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. So you've got to change. So I'm slowly starting to learn that although this might be the gold standard over here, you might be somewhere over here. So you've just got to try and make it work kind of thing. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's very cool. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you've been able to talk to all these guys, that I suppose you probably talk to them, they wouldn't think that the top of their game, but compared to where I am sitting, I'm going, geez, yeah, no, that's proper. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, the fact that I can actually sit here in South Africa and chat to you over there in Switzerland and have discussions about this, it's really sort of blown my mind a little bit at how, what sort of receptive guys are, or sort of easygoing about saying, like, yeah, cool, let's have a chat and discuss things. I mean, it is brilliant. So this strength coach network has changed the way I work, which is brilliant. And it's given me so much insight into how other guys are doing it and how I can do things better. And you get knowledge from, I think exactly what you said, you've learned so much from chatting to these guys online. And I think that is amazing. The fact that you can talk to all these different sort of experts in their field, for lack of a better word, and gain knowledge from that, just as a guy that's working with an amateur, it's fantastic. So I mean, as dodgy as technology can be at times, I think there's some really, really good bits with it, which is awesome. Like I really, really do enjoy it. I'm just trying to think. I wrote a bunch of questions that I wanted to ask you because I'm useless like that. I'll sort of think of all these questions and then forget to write them down. And then I get to the conversation and go, what was I going to chat to you about?
Write them down. It helps.
Big time. The one thing, I know it might just be an issue that I have. Let's take Strength Coach Network. I mean, the amount of information on there and sort of presentations and that you get is like, it's staggering. I mean, it blows my mind. How do you go about assimilating a lot of that knowledge? Because I mean, I can imagine with you having these podcasts on a constant basis, you're doing a bit of research here and there as well to try and sort of make things interesting and keep the flow going. How do you assimilate all that knowledge that you get and then apply it into your setting? Because I often find I'll go on like these binges. So I'll scare the hell out of myself and go, well, I don't know enough about, I don't know, let's say sprinting, for instance. So I go and like watch all the presentations, read everything I can on sprinting. And by the end of it, my head is so full of facts and figures and stuff that I'm just going, I actually don't know where to start. Like I feel more stupid than when I started kind of. So I'm just wondering how you go about sort of assimilating it and putting it into practice.
That makes sense. It's a good question. And that's a process that I've kind of refined over time. I haven't always done it like that, but if I really want to understand something and it kind of ties back into the content creation, I listen, I watch, I read, and I take notes. I try to kind of collect all the information that I need and then rewriting it in my own way, and whether it's in the form of a presentation for my YouTube channel or a carousel post for Instagram or a short like 2 cents of the day kind of thing that I've been doing more in French on Instagram, but just trying to structure my thoughts around the topic. That has helped me a lot with assimilating the information that I read. Because like you said, you can watch things all day and listen to things all day. If you don't actually act on it, you're only going to take away a minute part of it. And so for the sprinting, trying to structure my thinking around, okay, how do we progress sprinting? What are the different phases of progressions? Where do we start? And then where do we end up? And then again, what's appropriate for the level that I work at, right? So, power speed drills for me are the place to start. If you don't have a solid foundation in terms of sprinting, it is going to give you some of the stimulus that you're looking for without exposing you to too much high velocity, which could be problematic if you're not ready for it. And then you go to, hill sprints or resisted sprints, and then you go to flat, and then you go to fly. And I don't even talk about assisted sprinting over speed, because in my context, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't have practical experience with it. And so it doesn't make sense for me to talk about this. But then, for me, I had to understand what volumes can be used at each step of the way, whether it's power speed drills, hill sprints, what's the top end, what's the bottom end, and then how can I progress from week to week. And that's in that process, that's how I kind of learn is by applying it and try to, frame it in a practical setting, and then apply it, and then see what comes out the other side. Like the speed work that I did last year looks nothing like the speed work that I did this year in terms of volumes and progression. The tempo work is quite different too, where I use kind of Kier's very three-phase approach that he talks about on the Strength Coach Network in his presentation. But then I read Applied Sprint Training by James Smith, and there's a whole bunch of templates at the end that he used with different athletes that he worked with. And so I drew from that to build this year's kind of tempo around that, more than the Kier version, I would say. So again, just trying to apply it in a practical setting, or try to explain it in a way that's understandable, is for me the best way that I can assimilate and understand, and then actually have that to work with forward, rather than just reading and then forgetting 98% of it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. No, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Out of curiosity, you're talking about sort of like having crickets or negative comments on your social media and that. Have you got negative comments before on posts that you put up?
Not a ton on not directly on say Instagram or YouTube. Everything's been really positive so far. I'm waiting for the haters to come. I'm not super polarizing on many things, so I think that probably plays into it. I respect those that go a little farther and kind of push buttons for the sake of pushing. But I like pushing buttons for agility ladders, but that's kind of just that's my muse, right? I just have fun with that. At the end of the day, I'm not against them, but it's just something that I allow myself to kind of play on a little bit. But otherwise, and that's just, I think, relates back to how I see things and my personality. I try to have a pretty balanced opinion on things, which usually doesn't upset many people. I've had some negative comments or pushback on, or just more on Facebook groups than anywhere else. There's some rugby coach Facebook groups that I'm part of, and I post some of my stuff. And I've had a few weird comments on there, but I've never taken it personally. Like recently, and that wasn't even on a rugby coaching group. It was on a sprinting coach group. And I posted a video of the start of one of my guys, because I did a sprint session with him on the track, and we're working on his start. And there was a couple things that weren't going as well as I wanted to, and we tried different things, and I couldn't get him to do what I wanted him to do. And so I asked for advice, and I said, hey, so that's this guy. Here's what he does. That's his max speed. He's not very experienced in sprinting, but we're trying to improve those aspects of it. We've come a long way on this, but this still lagging behind. What would you recommend, or what do you see? And I got, 10, 15 people comment really positive things, and exercises or drills or things to add or things to change in his start setup, for example, that would help him. But then I also got a guy who came in and who said, maybe I'm missing something, but 7.8 meters per second doesn't sound really fast. I'm like, well, that was never the point of the question, I mean, he's an amateur player who's been only sprint training for seriously for maybe 5-6 months. He's 100 kgs. He's not a super athletic guy to begin with. And the point was never about how fast he can run or not run. No, if you're sure. Bolt ran, 12.52 meters per second. That's fucking fast. Okay. 7.8 is not fast. No, compared to that, no. But again, what are you comparing it to? So I try to not get, angry. And I just said, since he said, I don't know if I'm missing something, but I answered and I said, just let me know what you're missing and I'll fill you in. And he kept pushing for a couple comments in the same direction, eventually kind of diffused the thing. But
right.
yeah, so I feel there's a lot more of this on Facebook groups, I feel, than there is on the Instagram or YouTube, for me at least until now. Twitter, I don't really play a lot there. I follow a few guys and I read what's going on, but I feel like that might be the hotbed for negative comments if there was one. But honestly, I don't have any time for that shit. I don't
Right.
care. I don't care. If you want to, if you have something, negative, but that might be helpful, then I'm ready to hear it. But if it's just negativity for negativity's sake, then I'm just not interested, and I have other things to do with my time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's good, because like I'm one of those that I hate negative comments. So like I take it like as a reflection of myself. So I sort of like freak out and like, oh no, guy doesn't like me. So I think it does. It sort of taps into a personality thing. Because I mean, you take Keir, for example. He seems to thrive on like pushing buttons and just like starting
100%
stuff.
100%.
But yeah. Anyway, okay, no, that's cool. Out of curiosity, talking about the sprinting, funny enough, you've been using my sprint and that to help sort of gauge things. How have you found it? Does it work quite nicely?
Yeah, it works great in my opinion. I'm lucky that I have a track, 5 minutes away, or a track.
Yeah.
It's just a 100-meter stretch, but it's a track, and there's a nice line perpendicular to it. And so for the placing of the cones and whatnot, it's pretty straightforward. The first time took me a little longer just to get acquainted with the process, but now I got a 30-meter rollout thingy, and I already have my marks over there. I left my duct tape where the post had to be. So as long as nobody touches my duct tape, I can just set it up in about 4 minutes. But even if I have to reset it from scratch, it takes me maybe 10 minutes now to set it up. So the setup doesn't take very long. Running guys through it doesn't take the way that I do it is I film everything on the spot and then I process the data afterwards. If you do it all at once, then sure, it's going to take you forever. But I was able to run, I had 7, 8 people through, and people that were not experienced with sprinting. And we did really extensive warm up to make sure that everybody was ready for it. And we did some work on the start too, because that might be the most finicky part of the My Sprint app. Is it's a stop start. Well, if you use it as it was intended to be used, and the 3-point stop start is actually a pretty technical skill, right? And so if people don't know how to start, then it's going to have an impact on their time. So that's something that you have to keep in mind when working with people, is if they've had a couple chances to practice that 3-point start, it's going to help them greatly.
Okay.
But otherwise, I haven't done it yet with the rugby team. This preseason, I couldn't really justify it, and I still can't from a times perspective, because again, I can't individualize training afterwards anyway. But just to give the guys some numbers to chase, I think would be really good, just from a competition standpoint within the team. So that's something I'm looking to implement later this season. If we have a game fall through or something like that, I might just say, hey, let's do a speed session at the track. And I'm pretty confident I can get 20 guys through in under an hour. I mean, if I don't count warm up time and all that stuff, if you're well set up, you can probably get 30 guys through in an hour. Even maybe less. It's just a lot of data on the phone after to work with. But from that standpoint, it's really easy to run, I find. And then again, the processing on the back end is really straightforward as well. You just need to be really well organized with you need the guy's height and weight with clothes and shoes on that they had at the time of the sprint. So I brought my scale last time. They hopped on the scale, wrote it on the sheet, wrote their height, and that I had all their data to then enter in the thing. So I feel like if you're well organized, it gives you a really good picture of what's going on. Again, having that Vmax calculated for you right away, and then the different, you see the progress on the different portions of the sprint. Somebody might improve their start, but then not change their Vmax. That's fine. That's still an improvement that you couldn't have gone with a stopwatch alone, because maybe their final time is the exact same. So I think it gives you, and that's, I think Cam Joss talks about this quite a bit, the split times, and they tell a different story than just the 30-meter time, right? Two athletes can have the same 30-meter time, but have different ways of getting there. One is more, through power at the start, and one is more through reaching a higher max velocity later in the sprint. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's fairly easy it's very economically friendly, right? Financially viable in the sense that it's $10 for the app. And then, I don't know, I had to buy those posts from the store, but that's not a huge investment. Right. And the tripod I had already. So, I mean, it was pretty straightforward. And I think it can give you some really interesting data that otherwise you would need, like gates or a radar, which you're looking at minimum, 1 to 2K for those things. More for the radar, which is just not doable for an amateur setting. But if you're talking about a phone and a $10 app and a bit of a setup on a track, if you're well organized, it can really work well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. No, I was just curious because I see you posting a bit about the sprint, and it's quite cool. So I'm just curious. Yeah, I'm trying to think I think I've chatted about most of the stuff that I got written down. I don't know if you've got any questions or anything that you want to chat about. Otherwise,
cool, man. Yeah. No, it was good to hear about the fact that you've been using some of the stuff. What parts of what I've put out have you been using the most or found the most useful?
I like it. So I'm a big structure type person, so I'm not very good at doing things on the fly. So I like to have sort of, and this is sometimes I think where I fall short as a coach, I guess, is that I like to have my blocks of things. So like I like to know right at the beginning of the season, okay, cool, for the next couple of weeks, this is what we're doing for the next couple of weeks. And funny enough, after listening to the podcast with Derek Hansen, how he talks about Charlie Francis and how there had to be a little bit more sort of agile, I guess it's agile periodization type work that he was talking about. Made me realize that I've probably got to be a little bit more flexible, because I tend to be dead set, like, okay, cool, this is my chunk of work, we're going to work on this and then this and that. So what I've quite liked about your stuff is it's given that structure to work from like phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, and with sort of different variations in there. So like that to me is gold, because it really, it helps me have a clear view of what I need to get done now and how that's going to build on the next phase, kind of thing. So that's been very cool. Unfortunately, I mean, look, we haven't, since COVID hit, there's been no rugby here in South Africa whatsoever. So a lot of what I'm doing now is just trying to build a much bigger base of knowledge and understanding of how to do things, so that when things do kick off, hopefully towards the end of the year, I'm just much better prepared. I think, like you were saying, what I did at the beginning of this year and sort of end of last year is going to look very different to what I'm going to be doing now. I mean, there'll be some similarities because it worked, but I understand so much more now, and I think that to me is what's so cool about this, is I'm constantly learning stuff, and even when I think I know it all, I'll go and read something else. I'm like, oh, geez, okay, I didn't know that. So that's been very, very cool. Like I said to you earlier, though, there was the one thing that really upset me, is that we didn't actually get to put into practice all the hard work that we've done. So it would be very cool, because I actually don't think there's many clubs or teams here in South Africa that train the way that we did. So it would have been cool to see. I mean, granted, there's so many other variations that determine a win, but it would have been cool to see how we would have held up against some of the bigger sides that we'd play against, kind of thing. So anyway.
Like you said, it's the interesting part, is seeing how it all plays out on the field. What I noticed last year is that we were able to, really stand up to the big teams, and especially not crumble in the last part of the second half. It's even more in, tight game situations. We won, I believe, 3 games out of the 7 or 8 that we played 8 games, because there was 1 cup game and 7 championship games. We won, I believe, 3 games out of the 8 in the last 15 minutes. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so and at no point in the season, I was there for all the games. At no point in the season did we, and that's not true, we fell apart, kind of psychologically in one of the games. That's for sure. But it was psychological. We never, kind of blew up physically and weren't able to kind of keep up with the pace or anything with any of the teams. This year is going to be different because there's some clients on the other side. There's been some recruiting from the other teams and some international players and whatnot. So we'll see what comes out. But anyway, the guys had that mental composure for most of the games that allowed them to then, see the game through. And I think for me, that was very, very positive because their physical capabilities just weren't a weakness, It was never the low-hanging fruit kind of thing. And so I think that was probably the best thing for me in the sense that, that's all we can do, right? If they lag behind physically, then that's our fault. But if they don't, then it's kind of pass the hot potato on to the rugby coaches and see what they do with it. Because like we said before, the physical preparation is not going to win a game. Yeah.
Well, like one cool story just from one of the preseason games that we did manage to play was against the club champs from last year. Mm-hmm. And these guys are a big, strong side. Like they're really physical. And both the first and the second team basically defended for, I think it must have been about 60 of the 80 minutes they defended. And the last 20 just ran away with it. It was amazing. Like they just didn't let up. And then with our firsts, it was quite funny towards the end of the game. It was a really close game. I think we beat them by 2 points kind of thing. But towards the end of it, you could see their side was starting to flag. So they were getting tired and our Oaks just kept on going. So the guys on the bench just started laughing at them saying, yeah, you guys need to come and do some tempos or that kind of thing. So it was, it was really cool to see that the guys realized that the work that we had done was starting to pay dividends now. So, that was pretty cool. So it'll be nice to see what a full season would look like kind of thing. So.
Yeah, man, we were really gunning for that second part of the season too, and everything got cut literally the weekend of the first game that we were going to play. And we'd just done like a big preseason again in the winter because we have a big break here in Switzerland in the winter from end of November to mid-March actually. We had, a month off and then picked up in January and then had a good, solid 9 weeks. Yeah. 10, I think it was 10 weeks before the first game. So we were gunning for it and we were in second going into that second half at 1 point behind the first guys. So we were, it was going to be a hard second half, a lot of away games, big teams, but we were in a good spot. It was very frustrating for a lot of the guys, but I think they've carried that, hunger into this season. And we've had some juniors come up too, and it's a pretty exciting season. I look forward to it going through, and I hope we can play.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's it. When are you guys meant to kick off with your season now? Is it
12th?
Next couple of weeks?
10 days.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So well, that would be good.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. At least we can play a few games before everything shuts down again. But no, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, but also realist in the sense that who knows?
Yeah, you just have to see what happens kind of thing. I know that's a thing.
Exactly.
No one knows when sport's coming back. So we kind of just sitting going, well, I guess we'll see sort of thing. So
exactly.
Yeah. All right, man. But it's been a really good chat. So I really do appreciate you taking out the time and sort of humoring my questions kind of thing. So
no, man, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you reaching out. Actually, I'd like to do more of those in the future. So if anybody's listening and has questions for me, shoot me an email or a message. And I think that's how we're going to make things move forward, right? It's by exchanging and communicating. And that's also why I do what I do, is that I think this is the medium to make things move forward in the best way possible. And again, reach as many people as possible and have a broad impact. So that's how it's got to be done.
Okay. Awesome, man. Well, yeah, I appreciate it. And I hope the rest of your day is a good one. And I'll be keeping an eye on how things go. Hopefully I'll cross my fingers as well for the season to start for you guys at least.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Take care.
Awesome. Cheers, Sean.